Okay, this is part 4 of lecture 5. So we've worked our way through all of these different steps and we're at step 6, which is basically adding the cascading style sheet styles that are required to make the site look the way it used to. Now 6 is quite a long process, so I've broken it down into sub-steps, and there they are. You can see 6.1 and 6.2 are to do with shaping the whole page, determining where our logical document blocks will sit in the page, in other words, reconstructing our column layouts. And then 6.2 is all about setting the overall fonts, and that's as far as this video will go. And then the next one will cover the 0.3, 0.4 and 0.5 aspects. So let's start off with shaping the containing blocks. And this is going to use the CSS box model. And of course what we can do is we can take the invisible blocks that we've inserted into the document using divs and spans, typically divs at this point, and we can turn them into a CSS box. We can make them visible, we can float them left or right, we can clear content to either side, and we can treat them as boxes, and we can change the outside edge, the visual aspect, the border, the padding and the margin, things like that. So we've got our unique IDs inside the semantic HTML document. So we're going to use those, and because they're IDs, we're going to use a hash symbol to indicate the names of those IDs. Remember that IDs have to be unique. Classes, where we use a dot in the CSS files, that's where we'll use it and we'll apply a style to lots of different elements or areas inside. But for this part, we're going to be using IDs, so we're going to use the hash name, the hash symbol in front of each name. So this site already exists, so it was easy for me just to go through and determine the widths of the particular elements that we have. The banner across the top you can see is 943 pixels, and then we've got two columns either side of 160 pixels, and then that big central column with which is 623. So we need to add some layout rules, and those of course are going to go into the layout CSS file because they're to do with how the columns are actually placed inside our page. So we can go in and we can add a navigation width of 160. Content main, which is the central column, will say width 623, and then content sub will say is width 160. And that's the original file. So when we set those widths, we sort of initiate, click reload, this is what we end up with. So those are the widths applied. We've gone from there to there, and those widths are correct, but obviously what we haven't done is we haven't enabled those blocks, those invisible blocks, to sit next to each other. So the way that we do that is we add a float, and we go float each column to the left. And what will happen is the navigation will float to the left, content main will then sort of drift up to the side of the navigation, and content sub will similarly do the same. It will sit next to content main. There you can see float left, float left, float left. So let's apply that, and what should happen is we get that. So you can see we've gone from there where they're all lined up vertically. The moment we apply those floats, they can sit next to each other horizontally, so we end up with that. They're the widths and the floats. Getting better. There's a little bit more to do. We've got, if you look in the bottom right hand corner, there's the site information, and of course the site information has to lay horizontally right across the bottom of the page. Well, we can do that quite simply because we can say site info clear on the left, and what that would do is that will effectively only allow site info to float up as far as it can until it reaches a point where it wouldn't be clear on the left. So if we apply that, if you watch what happens, then basically it should fly down to the bottom. Now it's not aligned correctly, and we'll do that in a minute, but we've got our 3-column layout. Now this is the same technique that you would use if you had a 2-column layout or a 4-column layout. You basically mark out the logical content areas, and then you set the widths and then you float them and you place them where you want them to go inside the document. So that was 6.1. 6.2 then is to do with setting the overall font. So we have a font file. Now obviously cascading style sheets have this concept of the cascade. So what we can do is we can apply a style to the whole body, and what will happen is that all the elements inside the page that are inside the body will inherit that font information. So this is the one that was on the site originally. You can see it uses Lucida Grand and Verdana Sans Serif. When we have a series of fonts like that, remember that what will happen is the browser will try and see if the first font is available, and if it isn't, it will use the next one and it will keep going. And what we normally do is the one at the end, which in this case is Sans Serif, is the generic category of fonts that you've seen before. So in the event that none of the first 3 fonts are available, we'll switch to whatever sans serif font the browser actually has. Here you can see that I'm using a shorthand because I'm actually specifying the font size and the font, just by placing the font size at the beginning with a space between it and the particular fonts. Remember that if a font name has a space inside it, you need to wrap it up in double quotes, and that's why Lucida Grand has got the quotes around it. So if we apply that to this page, then what should happen is we get that. And obviously that's the font that was in the original page, so I didn't really have to make any decisions about which particular font to use. There are also websites out there that give you advice on which fonts go with which fonts. Now the next 3 steps basically are all to do with shaping the individual content areas themselves. So that will be in the next video. But 6.1 and 6.2 are really to do with shaping the document as a whole. So that's why we'll stop there. So the next one we'll do 6.3, 6.4 and 6.5.